The house was filled with laughter, music, and bright lights as a joyful family prepared for a grand wedding. Relatives had gathered from different cities, and the atmosphere was full of excitement. The bride, who had arrived from another town, was admired by everyone for her beauty, but there was something unusual about her silence. She spoke very little and often seemed lost in her own thoughts. The night before the wedding, while everyone was busy inside, she quietly walked out into the garden alone. The air was cold, and the trees stood still as if watching her. Suddenly, she heard a faint voice calling her name. She looked around, confused, but no one was there. The whisper grew closer, echoing through the darkness, and then everything went silent. The next day, something felt wrong. The bride looked the same, but her eyes were different, cold, empty, and distant. During the wedding ceremony, she sat beside the groom, but her attention wasn't on him. Instead, she stared at a corner of the hall, smiling in a strange and unsettling way. The groom felt uneasy. It was as if someone else was inside her. Suddenly, the lights flickered and went out completely. The music stopped, and a deep silence filled the room. People began to panic. When the lights came back, the bride was gone. Only her footprints remained, leading out toward the garden. Later, the elders revealed a terrifying truth. The garden had a dark past. It was said that a mysterious shadow haunted that place, and anyone who heard its call was never the same again, or never returned at all. The wedding hall was glowing with lights, laughter, and music. Everything seemed perfect. Guests were enjoying, and the groom couldn't stop smiling. The bride, who had arrived from another city, looked stunning, but strangely quiet. Some relatives even whispered that something about her felt off. That night, before the wedding, she stepped outside alone. The wind was cold, and the garden was unusually silent. As she walked near the old trees, she suddenly heard a soft whisper behind her. "Come closer." She froze. Her heart started racing. She turned around, but no one was there. Just darkness. Then suddenly, she felt a cold breath near her ear, and everything went black. The next day, the wedding began as planned. But the bride wasn't the same. Her smile felt forced, her eyes empty. During the ceremony, she slowly lifted her head and started staring at something no one else could see. The groom leaned closer and whispered, "Are you okay?" But instead of answering, she smiled, a wide, unnatural smile. Suddenly, all the lights went out. People screamed. The music stopped instantly. For a few seconds, there was only darkness and a faint, chilling laughter. When the lights came back on, the bride had disappeared. Panic spread everywhere. The doors were locked. No one had seen her leave. Then someone noticed something terrifying, muddy footprints starting from the stage, leading straight outside to the garden. Later, the truth came out. That garden was cursed. Years ago, a woman had died there on her wedding night, and her restless shadow still waited for another bride to take her place. The wedding venue stood beautifully decorated, glowing under golden lights. Music filled the air, and guests laughed as they celebrated the special night. The bride, who had arrived from a distant city, looked breathtaking in her dress. But something about her felt distant, almost unreal. She barely spoke, and her smile never reached her eyes. On the night before the wedding, she couldn't sleep. Drawn by an unknown feeling, she stepped outside into the silent courtyard behind the house. The sky was dark, and the wind whispered through the trees. As she walked further, she noticed a figure standing far away, still, watching her. Her heart began to pound. "Who's there?" she called out. No answer. The figure slowly raised its hand and then vanished. She stood frozen. Then suddenly, a cold sensation wrapped around her, like invisible hands pulling her into darkness. The next day, the wedding began, but the bride had changed. Her movements were slow, unnatural. During the ceremony, she suddenly spoke in a low voice, one that didn't sound like hers. "I've been waiting." The groom stepped back in shock. The guests fell silent. Suddenly, the lights flickered violently and went out. A loud crash echoed through the hall. People screamed in fear. When the lights returned, the bride was standing at the center of the stage, but something was wrong. Her reflection in the mirror behind her was missing. Then, within seconds, she disappeared. No doors opened. No one saw her leave. Later, the truth surfaced. That courtyard was built over an abandoned grave, where a forgotten soul lingered, searching for a body a life, and a wedding it never got to finish. The wedding hall shimmered with lights, music, and celebration. Guests were laughing, cameras flashing, and everything seemed perfect. The bride, who had come from another city, looked stunning in her red dress. But there was something unusual about her calmness. She barely spoke, and her eyes often wandered as if she was listening to something no one else could hear. Late that night, while everyone was asleep, she quietly walked out toward the old storeroom behind the house. It was a place no one used anymore. The door creaked open on its own, and a cold air rushed past her. Inside, she saw an old mirror covered in dust. As she stepped closer, her reflection didn't move. She froze. Slowly, the reflection smiled, but her real face didn't. A sudden whisper filled the room. "You came back." The next morning, the wedding continued as planned, but the bride was no longer the same. Her expressions felt controlled, almost fake. During the ceremony, she kept glancing toward the exit, as if someone was waiting for her. The groom felt uneasy. He held her hand. It was ice cold. Suddenly, the mirror from the storeroom shattered loudly, even though no one was there. At the same moment, the lights in the hall began to flicker. Guests looked around in fear. The bride slowly stood up and began walking backward. Her smile grew wider, unnatural. Then, in complete darkness, she vanished. When the lights came back, chaos filled the hall. The bride was gone without a trace. Later, the family discovered a horrifying truth. That mirror once belonged to a woman who died on her wedding day, and her spirit was still trapped inside, waiting for another bride to take her place and set her free. The wedding was grand, filled with lights, music, and endless joy. Guests laughed, children ran around, and everything looked perfect from the outside. The bride, who had come from a distant city, looked breathtaking, but there was something unsettling about her silence. She smiled when needed, but her eyes seemed tired, almost haunted. On the night before the wedding, she woke up suddenly, feeling like someone had called her name. The room was dark, yet she felt a presence watching her. Slowly, she got up and followed the feeling, walking through empty hallways until she reached a locked door at the end. She didn't remember ever seeing it before, but somehow it opened. Inside, the room was cold and empty, except for faint whispers echoing all around. She tried to leave, but the door slammed shut behind her. The whispers grew louder, surrounding her, filling her mind, until everything went silent. The next day, the wedding continued, but something had changed. The bride looked the same, but her behavior was different. She barely blinked. She didn't react. It was like she was there, but not really. During the ceremony, as everyone watched, she slowly turned her head toward the crowd and started laughing softly. The groom froze. That laugh didn't belong to her. Suddenly, every phone screen in the hall flickered at once, showing a dark figure standing behind the bride. Guests screamed and dropped their phones. The lights went out instantly. For a few seconds, there was nothing but silence. When the lights came back, the bride was gone. Only her wedding veil remained on the floor. Later, it was discovered that the locked room had a terrible past. Anyone who entered it was never truly the same again, because something inside never let them leave alone. The wedding day had finally arrived. The house was alive with music, laughter, and the scent of flowers. Guests filled every corner, celebrating the union of two families. The bride, who had come from far away, looked stunning, but there was something distant about her, as if her mind was somewhere else entirely. Earlier that morning, one of the bridesmaids noticed her standing alone in front of a window, whispering softly. "Who are you talking to?" she asked. The bride slowly turned, her expression blank. "No one, they just don't want me to leave." The bridesmaid laughed it off, thinking it was a joke, but unease settled in her heart. As the ceremony began, everything seemed normal at first. The groom smiled nervously, the guests watched with excitement, and the bride walked gracefully down the aisle. But as she reached the stage, she suddenly stopped. Her grip on the bouquet tightened. "I can't," she whispered. The groom stepped forward, confused. "What happened?" Then she looked up, but it wasn't her anymore. Her voice changed, deeper, colder. "She belongs to us." Gasps filled the hall. Suddenly, a strong gust of wind blew through the closed room, knocking over decorations. The lights flickered violently. People began to panic. The bride started stepping backward, her eyes fixed on something no one else could see. "Don't let them take me," she whispered again. But this time, it sounded like two voices speaking at once. Then, everything went dark. When the lights came back, she was gone. No doors were open. No windows were broken. It was as if she had simply disappeared. Days later, the family uncovered a terrifying truth. The land where the house was built once held an old ruin, where people claimed unseen entities lived. And sometimes they didn't just watch. The wedding hall was filled with joy, laughter, and music echoing through every corner. Lights sparkled like stars, and everyone was celebrating what seemed like a perfect union. The bride, who had arrived from another city, looked breathtaking in her dress, but there was a strange sadness in her eyes, as if she didn't fully belong there. No one noticed when she quietly slipped away from the crowd. She walked toward the rooftop, drawn by a feeling she couldn't explain. The night sky was dark, the wind whispering softly around her. As she stepped closer to the edge, she saw someone standing there, a figure dressed in old, faded wedding clothes. "Why did you come back?" the figure asked. The bride's voice trembled. I don't know you." The figure slowly turned. Its face was pale, eyes hollow. "This was my wedding too." Before she could react, everything around her seemed to spin. The world went silent. Moments later, she returned downstairs. But something wasn't right. During the ceremony, she stood beside the groom, completely still, her expression blank, her presence cold. When the groom held her hand, he felt a sudden chill run through his body. "Are you okay?" he whispered. She turned toward him slowly and smiled. "I've waited so long for this moment." Her voice wasn't hers. Suddenly, the music stopped. The lights flickered, and a loud thud echoed through the hall. Guests looked around in fear. Then, right in front of everyone, she collapsed. People rushed forward, but when they reached her, she was gone. Only her jewelry remained scattered on the floor. Later, it was discovered that years ago, a bride had fallen from that very rooftop on her wedding night. Since then, her spirit had been searching for a chance to finish what she never could. The wedding celebration was in full swing. Bright lights decorated the hall, music echoed through the air, and guests filled every corner with joy and excitement. The bride, who had arrived from another city, looked graceful and beautiful, but her silence felt unusual. She barely spoke, and sometimes she would stare into space for long moments, as if listening to something no one else could hear. On the night before the wedding, she couldn't sleep. At exactly midnight, she felt a strange pull coming from outside. Without telling anyone, she stepped out into the backyard. The air was heavy, and the garden felt strangely still. Near an old, broken well, she stopped. A whisper came from inside it. "Come closer." Her breath shook. "Who's there?" No answer. But then, her own voice echoed back from the well. Confused and frightened, she ran back inside. The next day, the wedding began as planned. Everything looked normal, but something about the bride had changed. She moved slower, her eyes darker, her expression empty. During the ceremony, the groom noticed she wasn't blinking. "Look at me," he whispered. She slowly turned her head and smiled, but it wasn't her smile. Suddenly, the ground beneath the hall trembled slightly. The lights flickered. A cold wind rushed through the closed doors. Guests panicked as the atmosphere turned terrifying in seconds. The bride stepped backward toward the exit. Her voice echoed softly. "I was never the first one you brought here." Then everything went dark. When the lights returned, she was gone. Only wet footprints led from the stage, straight toward the backyard well. Later, villagers revealed the truth. Years ago, that well was sealed after several mysterious disappearances. They said it doesn't just reflect your voice, it answers back. The wedding hall was decorated like a dream. Golden lights, fresh flowers, and soft music created a perfect atmosphere. Guests were smiling, taking photos, and celebrating happily. The bride, who had come from another city, looked elegant and calm, but her silence felt strange. She often paused mid-movement, as if she was listening to something no one else could hear. On the night before the wedding, she couldn't sleep. Around midnight, she quietly left her room and walked through the empty corridor. The house was silent except for faint ticking sounds from an old clock. She found herself standing in front of a locked basement door. She had never seen it before, but now it was slightly open. A cold breeze came from inside. Against her better judgment, she stepped down. The basement was dark, damp, and completely silent, except for a faint sound, like someone breathing. Then a whisper filled the room. "You finally came." She turned quickly, but there was no one there. The next morning, the wedding began as planned. Everything looked normal again, but the bride had changed. Her movements were slower, her expressions flat. She barely reacted to anyone speaking to her. During the ceremony, the groom gently held her hand. It was ice cold. "Are you okay?" he asked. She slowly looked at him. And then, in a voice that didn't sound like hers, she replied, "I never left." The lights flickered violently. Guests began to panic as the temperature dropped inside the hall. The music stopped. Silence spread everywhere. The bride suddenly stepped away from the groom and walked backward toward the exit, smiling strangely. Then everything went dark. When the lights came back, she was gone. The basement door downstairs was now wide open. Inside, there were fresh footprints leading deeper underground, where no one had ever dared to go before. The wedding was supposed to be perfect. The hall was beautifully decorated with glowing lights, red roses, and soft music playing in the background. Guests were laughing, taking pictures, and enjoying the celebration. The bride, who had arrived from another city, looked stunning, but her silence felt unusual. She spoke very little, and sometimes she would stop and stare at nothing for a long time. No one knew what she had experienced the night before. At midnight, she had woken up feeling cold. Something felt wrong in the house. Slowly, she walked out of her room and found herself standing in front of an old storage door that no one had mentioned before. It was slightly open. A dark wind came from inside. She should have walked away, but she didn't. Inside, she saw nothing but a broken mirror covered in scratches. As she stepped closer, her reflection slowly smiled at her, but she did not. Then a whisper came. "You are finally here." She ran back upstairs, shaken and confused. The next day, the wedding began. Everything looked normal, but the bride was not the same anymore. Her expressions were empty, her eyes unfocused. It was as if she was present, but not fully alive. During the ceremony, the groom held her hands. They were freezing. "Are you feeling okay?" he asked. She slowly turned toward him, and in a soft, broken voice said, "You shouldn't have brought me here." The lights flickered violently. A deep silence spread across the hall. Guests froze as the temperature dropped suddenly. Then she stepped backward, smiling faintly, toward the dark corridor outside. The lights went out. When they came back on, she was gone. Only the broken mirror from the storage room was found in the center of the hall, now perfectly clean and showing one extra reflection that didn't belong to anyone in the room.